Biden finally says the quiet part out loud, and Democrats struggle to come up with meaningful solutions. This is Big Red, and you're listening to the Big Red for America show. It brings me no joy. Well, I mean, who am I kidding? It actually brings me a lot of joy to be proven right, but I wish I wasn't right about this. Joe Biden finally let the cat out of the bag and said the quiet part out loud in regards to his energy policy. So if you'll remember, about 2 months ago, when I talked about Biden's drive to try to force America to go green, and he was using higher gas prices to do that, well, while he was overseas talking with some of our allies, he accidentally said this.
When it comes to the gas prices, we're going through an incredible transition that is taking place that, God willing, when it's over, we'll be stronger and the world will be stronger and less reliant on fossil fuels when this is over.
Did you hear that? We as Americans are going through an incredible transition. That when this is over, we will be less reliant on fossil fuels. If you had any doubts in your mind, Biden is clearly saying out loud for the world to hear that high gas prices are meant to force us Americans to go green. Like I said, remember I said this 2 months ago. Biden's whole strategy behind the rising gas prices was a foolish attempt to push Americans to go green. And he finally admitted to it, and to be honest, I feel vindicated. I was way ahead of the curve on this, so you should all really listen to me. It's almost like I know what I'm talking about. I'm kidding, of course. Like I said, I really wish I wasn't right about this. But, I'll take that victory. And of course, this has left Democrats scrambling. Remember, like I said, their whole plan was to use high gas prices to convince Americans to go green. And we've seen this every time anyone questions anybody in Biden's administration about high gas prices. For example, we saw Jen Psaki say this in late 2021.
And I know that's been a criticism, so that's why I said that, not an accurate one. Look, our view is that the rise in gas prices over the long term makes an even stronger case for doubling down our investment and our focus on clean energy options so that we are not relying on the fluctuations and OPEC and their willingness to put more supply and meet the demand in the market.
I love it. You can't make this up. She says we need to go green in response to rising gas prices. Not we need to increase domestic production. We need to increase our supply. No. We need to go green. And of course, this was the exact same response that Secretary Granholm said in May of 2021 after a Russian cyber attack on a gas pipeline.
Obviously, we have the acute issues with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, but looking more holistically in a macro view, how does this speed up the efforts at DOE to move in more of a renewable direction, since this is going to have an impact on people at the pump?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously are all in on making sure that we meet the president's goals of getting to 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And, if you drive an electric car, this would not be affecting you, clearly.
I love how she smiles and laughs. Like, hee, we all need to drive electric, and this wouldn't be a problem anymore. So that's great to hear. Once again, she's a Secretary of Energy, and there's no, we're going to increase supply, or we're going to try to make our pipeline systems not susceptible to Russian cyber attacks. I guess that must have been left off Biden's list of things when he asked Russia to not attack us. He must have left that off the list. And of course, Secretary Pete Buttigieg also said going green would help rural people save money.
Clean transportation can bring significant cost savings for the American people as well. Last month, we announced a $5 billion investment to build out a nationwide electric vehicle charging network so that people from rural to suburban to urban communities can all benefit from the gas savings of driving an EV.
I'm bringing up these videos again because I want to illustrate the fact that their response has always been the same. Consistently from over years, over the 2 years that they've been in power, their response has always been the same. High gas prices wouldn't affect you if you had an electric car. They keep trying to push us to go to green vehicles. Their response has never been to reduce gas prices or the price of gas or increase production or any of that, but rather their plan is to keep using these high prices to push their green agenda, which Biden said loud and clear recently. And we see the results of this policy. Since I last talked about gas prices, they've continued to rise. In early March, the average price per gallon was $4.41.5, and now we're sitting at a cool $4.69.4 according to White Chart. In fact, gas prices have now surpassed $4 a gallon in all 50 states, which is a first in history. So congratulations, Joe Biden, for your administration setting another record. First, you have the inflation record, and now you have 2 gas price records. So congratulations, you were really building back better. And of course, the normal Democrat response is to try to blame anyone except who's actually responsible, which is their own policies, for the rise in gas prices. So I remember their first excuse was that the gas prices were transitory because of increased demand for gas once the American economy reopened. This is espoused in a USA Today, quote, fact check article in June 2021, which was titled Fact Check: Rising gas prices due to high demand and low supply, not Biden's policies. Now, this is absolutely partially true. Low demand during COVID did drop the price of crude oil, which resulted in producers cutting back their production. And as the world reopened, we did experience increased demand, while still having the low supply. But American production won't return to its pre-COVID levels, according to the Energy Information Administration, until past 2022, if they'll ever recover. So why isn't America rushing to reamp our gas production? And the answer is Biden's antagonistic policies. So let's cross off increased demand. While that is for sure to blame for some increase in gas prices, that's not why we're seeing what we're seeing now, because the simple counter to this would be to increase our own production. But we're not. So next, they tried to blame Putin for the rise in gas prices. And like I pointed out on the last podcast I did on these gas prices, that they did bump pretty significantly, like 20 cents, I want to say, once Putin invaded Ukraine and the U.S. stopped importing Russian oil. But as much stink the Democrats make about this, Russia only accounts for about 8% of all our oil imports. So losing 8% of our supply would certainly result in a rise in prices. But I think our dependence on Russian oil is greatly overstated, or at least greatly overimplied. But we even saw after Russia's invasion, so let's look in late April, we actually see a dip in gas prices, going down to almost $4 a gallon, until pivoting and continuing to climb to their current levels. So let's listen to Secretary Granholm again shift the blame back to Putin in a heated exchange with Senator Josh Hawley.
Do you agree with the Democrat members of this committee that oil and gas companies are engaged in price gouging?
I haven't heard them say that they are engaged in price gouging. I've heard people say that it's something to be looked at. As a former attorney general, I looked at that when I was the attorney general of Michigan to make sure that it happened. And there were some isolated instances where that was happening. So for the sake of the people that we all care about, we want to make sure there's no gouging at all. But I'm not saying, and I don't know that anybody's saying that there's wholesale gouging.
We had an entire hearing with an entire group of people on this dais absolutely accusing companies of price gouging.
So she correctly explains the, quote, basic laws of economics, but completely ignores the fact that Biden and her administration have been constantly cutting back American oil supply by canceling leases, pipelines, and implementing costly regulations and halting on-site drilling. Ted Cruz has a great timeline of Biden's antagonistic policies towards the oil and gas industries and the effect it had on the price per gallon of oil. For example, as soon as Joe Biden took office on January 20th of 2021, he stopped the Keystone Pipeline. Moving forward, on May 7th, 2021, after the Russian cyber attack, he takes 30% of the land off limits to oil and gas drilling. June 1st, he halts drilling in the Arctic Reserve. He then overturns the Trump natural gas regulations. Later that year, November 15, once they're questioned again on the rising gas prices, he stops drilling in the Chicao Canyon. October 29th, so about 2 weeks earlier, he begins the, quote, social cost of carbon, which increases the price it takes to start drilling. We see in February 2022, February 24th of 2022, that Russia finally invades Ukraine. We see a steep increase there. But it doesn't matter. Biden still has the SEC propose a new anti-oil rule after that. We see prices go up again. And most recently, so we're looking at May of this year, gas prices are at record high levels. Biden decides to cancel the remaining lease sales in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. So these antagonist policies not only hurt domestic supply, as we've seen, he's taking land off limits, he's stopping domestic drilling, he's stopping leases. So not only does that hurt domestic supply, but it also impedes investment on oil and gas. So why would anybody invest in oil and gas when at any moment a neurotic president could cancel the lease and you wouldn't make money or any return on your investment? I can see, I don't understand how Secretary Granholm can sit up there and say that Joe Biden's policies have had nothing to do with the rising gas, despite her trying to cite basic economics. But that hasn't stopped the Democrats, so now they're transitioning to another Democrat favorite, price gouging. So it can't be their policies. It has to be, quote, big oil colluding together to keep prices high and to hurt the American public. So this fantasy has caused gems like this to be tweeted. This is by Ilhan Omar. She says, big oil quarterly profits. Shell, $9.1 billion, which is 3 times more than this time last year. ExxonMobil, $5.4 billion, 3 times more than last year. BP, $6.2 billion, 2 times more than last year. Chevron, $6.3 billion, 4 times more than last year. The problem is greed, and we are all paying the price, unquote. So let's ignore the fact that Democrats, until about 2 weeks ago, were blaming the rise in gas prices on increased demand, which would actually make sense for the rise in profits. This would make sense even if the prices stayed the same or went down. If only 100 people were trying to buy gas at $2 a gallon, and now it's 500 people trying to buying gas at $2 a gallon, the gas companies are still going to see a profit because there's a higher demand for gas. Or let's pretend gas prices even went down to $1 a gallon, but now there's 5,000 people trying to buy gas. They would still see an increased profit. So this is only a talking point if you don't understand economics. And of course, socialists like Ilhan Omar don't understand economics. To illustrate how new this price gouging argument is, here is once again Secretary Granholm testifying before Congress that, quote, she hasn't heard anyone mention price gouging.
Me, under oath, that these policies had no effect.
I'm telling you that 94% of the oil and gas industry...
I'm not interested in their opinion. I'm interested in the facts.
So, no, they did not. Ask
That is
Vladimir
a remarkable statement.
about the increase in demand and the decrease in supply from pulling Russian barrels of oil off the market, thanks to rightly the United States saying we're not going to take Russian oil. Coming out of COVID...
So what explains the increase between January and August of 2021?
Coming out of COVID, there was an increase in demand because people were driving again. When there was no demand, the prices dropped. That is a basic law of economics. The prices dropped.
I have to say, Madam Secretary, with all due respect, your answers are insulting. And they are insulting to the people of Missouri who are looking for action. Now, you said 2 months ago your department was on war footing. What are you doing to bring down the price of gasoline, which has been going up consistently since you took office?
So I love that. I'm not sure anyone is saying there's wholesale price gouging. And that was on April 20. That was tweeted out on April 28th. And Ilhan Omar tweeted this out 2 weeks later. She tweeted out that tweet about the profits 2 weeks later. But even still, Democrats are now continuing to push the price gouging narrative while actively undermining U.S. production and supply of oil. Here we have Representative Adam Schiff saying, quote, "The House just took action to crack down on big oil's price gouging. $6 a gallon for Californians is unacceptable and unnecessary, the result of corporations putting profits over people. The best solution? Holding big oil to account and going all in on green energy." So let's take a step back and Adam Schiff is completely ignoring the fact that almost $1.20 of every gallon of gas in California is going to state fees and taxes, like their low carbon gas program, which adds 22 cents per gallon of gas, their greenhouse gas programs, which adds 15 cents, their state tax, which adds 51 cents per gallon. So obviously we see there's a huge cost associated with just buying gas in California, which is why it might be $6 a gallon. So if you actually took away all that unnecessary taxation on it, you would see lower prices. But this still completely unaccounts for that the actual best solution would be to promote U.S. supply and production of oil. So increased supply with constant demand will do what to prices? Oh, of course, basic economics. It will bring them down. But that's not what Representative Schiff's advocating for. He's advocating for more government regulation of the gas industry, which leads to increased cost of production and which leads to increased prices, and decrease in supply of gas by trying to push green energy, sin nuclear of course, when America clearly isn't ready for it. He wants to go all in on green energy. This in no way will reduce the price of gasoline for Californians or for the rest of America. So like Schiff said, the House of Representatives actually passed an anti-gouging bill, which is on its way to the Senate for a vote. And what's in the bill? I mean, if I had to guess, not reading the bill yet, it would result in more government regulation of the gas industry while refusing to do absolutely anything about high prices. Oh, would you look at that? Would you look at this ABC article? It actually turns out that I'm completely right. According to an ABC article, the bill allows the FTC to investigate cases of price gouging and impose fines on those companies and give this money towards weatherization and low energy assistance. It would also allow Biden, or any president for that matter, to make a, quote, emergency proclamation that would make it unlawful for companies to increase fuel prices to excessively high levels, unquote. Will this protect consumers? And the answer is no. If anything, it will increase shortages because prices limit consumption. And as we've seen, Democrats are constantly undermining the U.S. production or supply of oil, as seen by President Biden's executive actions, which over the past 2 years. If they cap the price of gasoline, we will run out of gas because producers will just stop producing oil to be used for gasoline because it's no longer profitable. But instead, they'll funnel it to more profitable ventures like plastics and gas. We'll see incredible shortages of gasoline if this is ever implemented. An economic advisor under Obama described these price control bills as, quote, pretty gimmicky. These price gouging bills, because, they've got a lot of extra demand. What happens when demand goes up? Prices go up, unquote. Which is, of course, basic economics, which the Biden administration likes to point out, except when it undermines their own agenda. He continues saying, quote, there's an old saying, the cure for high prices is high prices. That's a little painful to deal with, but it is what elicits the additional supply, and it brings more producers into the market. It is what brings prices down, unquote. Which, of course, again, basic economics. He finishes off by saying, quote, we need to let that process work. If you try to interfere with it, you're going to make things worse. We tried that in the 70s. It was a big failure. We shouldn't be repeating it again. And what's this process? The process is letting high prices bring in producers to increase supply and therefore lower prices. But this is not the action the Democrats are taking. As I pointed out, they're using this to quote-unquote transition, which is the exact words out of Joe Biden's own mouth, to green energy. They need high prices. They have never responded to high gas prices by saying we will increase our own domestic supply or production of gasoline. Instead, Biden has continuously undercut the oil industry by revoking leases, and like I said, most recently, a large oil reserve in Alaska and 2 in the Gulf of Mexico. ABC describes this decision, quote, "It comes at a challenging political moment when gas prices are hitting painful new highs. So instead of increasing U.S. supply and production of oil, Biden decides to limit it, despite high gas prices." It's clear lowering gas prices are not a priority for Biden and his administration, period. But remember, like I said, 2 months ago, high gas prices actually undercut Biden's whole plan. Like I said last time, high gas prices, which leads to inflated prices of almost all goods and services, hurts the middle class and lower classes, which are who he wants to be buying electric cars. So after sapping away the savings of millions of middle and lower class Americans with inflation, he has the nerve to suggest we buy expensive electric cars? It doesn't make any logical sense. But that isn't stopping the administration, who hasn't thought one step deeper to their plan of raising gas prices to force this transition. So what are the big Reddit takeaways for this episode? First, I'm right, and I'm always right. Joe Biden has finally admitted that he is using high gas prices to transition America to green energy. The second is that Democrats cannot produce a meaningful solution because they simply don't want to. All their policy priorities are set at forcing us to go green and limiting U.S. supply and production of oil. But producing more oil would be the only thing to help us lower gas prices. And finally, this whole plan to force a transition to green energy is not very well thought out. Using high inflation and inflated gas prices to then encourage Americans to buy expensive electric cars just doesn't make sense because we no longer have the money to do so. But when has some simple things like logic and facts stopped the Democrats before? Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Big Red for America show. I will see you all next week. Did you like what you heard this week? Make sure to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify and Google Podcasts. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms from our site on Anchor FM. If you want to follow us on social media, you'll see our link down in the description. And if you really like it, make sure you share this podcast with all your friends. That's one of the best ways that you can help this podcast grow. Thank you all so much. See you next time.